Tonight, let's step back into a forgotten chapter of dust and breath. It's not into the stories told loud, but the ones buried quiet. Behind locked doors and sun-bleached cloth, where the wind always hums, like something remembering. The Wild West was never truly wild, not in the way the books say. It was slower than that, hungrier, a place where time limped instead of galloped. And every step forward cost you something small, a drop of sweat, a cracked heel, a name you no longer used. In this story, there are no heroes, no duels, no triumph. It's just a long day, trying not to disappear. In a town that doesn't care if you do, somewhere between sunrise and sleep, you will begin to feel it. The soft pull of a place that's too dry to cry. Where are you watching from? What time is it there? Dim the lights. Let your breath slow. Let the world fade. Let it all slip backward into splintered porches. Peeling paint, the creak of a weather-worn sign swinging above an empty door. The dust will settle around you soon. Don't move too fast. The day hasn't started yet. Out here, even the wind forgets your name. Close your eyes gently now. The morning comes dry and low. There are footsteps in the straw just beyond the barn wall. Nothing loud. Just the kind of sound that makes your heart stay quiet. Sleep is still clinging to your fingers. The floor is rough beneath your back. The air smells like old tobacco and saddle leather. It's not your home, but it's where you've woken up. That is where our story begins. The barn was older than memory. It's older than most things in this town. The boards sagged inward, soft from years of holding up sky and horses and the quiet weight of time. In the stillness before sunrise, everything inside felt held. Not by walls, but by breath. Long, slow, sleeping breath. And in the far left corner, beneath a moth-a-ton blanket, someone else was breathing too. The stranger had come in after dark. Barefoot coat pulled too high, a limp in their left leg that bent each step into a whisper. They hadn't said a word, just curled beside the feed sacks and let the night swallow them whole. No one had asked their name. No one ever did. The air inside the barn smelled of hay, rusted tools, and animals long gone. Mice rustled softly in the walls. Pitchfork leaned tired against the beam. Dust floated in slow, golden trails, catching the early light that pushed through the crooked wood slats above. It was not quite morning yet, but not night either. It's a kind of hour where sleep thins out and the world waits. The stranger stirred, not fully waking. It's just that subtle shift of limbs, remembering how heavy they are. A hand moved beneath the blanket. Fingers brushed straw and threadbare canvas. The body turned once, slowly, spine clicking like a door hinge. And then, stillness again. Outside, wind rolled low across the plain, stirring the dust before the heat could. A loose shutter creaked on the far side of the barn, tapping lightly like a finger against glass. The rooster hadn't crowed yet, but the horses were awake. Breathing slow, watching the stranger's eyes opened. Cracked lips. Crusted lashes. The kind of dry that starts in your throat and ends in your bones. Their gaze didn't move much, just stayed on the ceiling, tracing the warped lines of the roof above, as if reading an old story written there in shadow and light. They sat up slowly, dragging the blanket with them. Beneath it, a body too thin for the coat. A shirt gone gray, wrists like kindling. Boots gone. There'd been boots. 2 of them. Lined up just so beside the post. But now, only their outline remained in the straw. Hollow shadows, like footprints that never made it out. The stranger stared at the space where they'd been. Didn't curse, didn't cry, just let the silence fold around it. They stood unsteady, bare soles meeting cold wood, each board a new sensation. Splinters, knots, nails pressed flat by time. 1 step, then 2. The sound was soft but not silent. Enough to wake a nearby mare, who shifted and let out a breath through her nostrils. Light was rising outside, not warm, not golden, just brighter. Dull haze of day stretching across a sky that hadn't seen rain in months. The stranger crossed the barn in silence, past a rusted wheelbarrow, past an old saddle slumped on a beam like a sleeping dog. They paused at the doorway, hand on the frame, head tilted just slightly, as if listening for something only they could hear. And then, with no ceremony at all, stepped out into the dirt. The town was barely stirring, just a few crows calling from the fence posts. A dog barking 2 streets over, then falling silent. The buildings were bleached gray from the sun, their signs faded to ghosts of words. One said general, another said feed, the rest were too worn to read. The road wasn't paved, just packed earth and old tracks. Wagon wheels long gone, footsteps erased by wind. The air already shimmered with heat, though the sun hadn't risen far. The stranger squinted against it, eyes narrow, jaw set. They stepped out into the street like someone walking into memory. The ground was hot underfoot, not yet burning, but enough to sting, enough to remind them where they were. They passed the saloon, its doors half swaying in a wind that carried nothing but dust. Behind its windows, shapes moved. Men still drinking from the night before, heads low, hats lower. A woman laughed, once, then went quiet again. Further down, the blacksmith's forge gave off a faint hiss. No flames yet, just smoke. A boy swept the doorway with half-hearted strokes, eyes darting to the stranger's bare feet. But he said nothing. No one ever did. Past the sheriff's office, past the livery, past the place where the horses were tied too long, too tight, the stranger walked through it all like someone who'd done it before. Not in this town, but somewhere just like it. Their shadows stretched long behind them, broken only by the stones in the road. And ahead, nothing, just more heat, more sky. A world that promised nothing and kept that promise well. The barn faded behind them, the sound of straw settling, the whisper of wind through cracked boards, the ghosts of yesterday, curling slow in the corners of a place that forgot them. The stranger walked on, not faster, not slower, just forward. The west didn't welcome. It waited, and now. The day had begun. The cookhouse sat low against the rising sun, its roof slouched, like it had given up holding itself tall years ago. The chimney coughed a thin thread of smoke, dark and lazy, drifting east with the morning wind. No sign marked the place, but everyone knew where it was. The smell of burnt beans and old grease did more than any sign could. The stranger approached slow. Their shadow dragged behind them like a question nobody wanted to ask. The cookhouse porch creaked underfoot. 4 steps up, 3 rotting. They took the long way around, past the broken axle leaning against the wall, past the cat with one eye who didn't bother to move as they passed. The door opened with a breath, not a sound. Inside, the air was thick. Heavy with heat, thicker with quiet. Flies clung to the corners. Grease shined on every surface like it had settled there to stay. The single window was open, but the curtain hadn't moved in weeks. It hung stiff, yellowed, stained with the memory of bacon and pipe smoke. 3 tables. 7 chairs. Only 5 in use. The strangers stepped in like they were stepping onto a frozen lake. Not cautious. Just familiar with how things break when you least expect it. No one looked up. A man in a blue flannel shirt stirred something in a chipped bowl. His hands were big, fingers thick, stained black from coal or ink or both. He didn't blink, just kept stirring. Next to him, an old woman with white braids sipped from a dented tin mug. Her spoon rested on the table. Her eyes never left the corner of the room. There was a space open near the stove, the warmest place in the room. But the stranger didn't go there. They chose the seat closest to the wall. Back to something solid. The chair groaned beneath their weight. Or maybe the room did. The cook didn't speak. Just turned his back and ladled something from a pot too large for its stove. The spoon clanged against the iron, slow and steady. He filled a shallow tin bowl, slid it across the counter. That was the price of being seen. The stranger rose, took the bowl, returned to the chair. No thanks. No nod. Just the dull scrape of the spoon against the bottom, like metal dragging against thought. The food was warm but tired. Beans again. Salt if you were lucky. They ate slow. Small bites. Ate the kind that, by time, instead of filling you. A fly landed on the edge of the table. The stranger didn't brush it away. The air outside was starting to burn, and the cookhouse walls trapped it like a box. Sweat traced a path down the stranger's neck. No breeze. It's the hiss of boiling water and the creak of wood cooling from the night. Conversation did not exist here. There was only sound, the kind that filled space without meaning. A boot tapping, a spoon clicking, a breath drawn in and not let out all the way. Across the room, someone coughed, a deep, wet cough that said more than any words could. Nobody turned. The stranger's bowl was nearly empty. They scraped the last bite from the corner, lifted it slow, let it rest on their tongue. It tasted like metal, like survival, like something that would keep you walking but never running. Someone stood. Their chair screeched back. The door opened, swung halfway, then stuck like it always did. They shoved it once with a boot heel, and it gave way. Light spilled in. And for a moment, dust danced through the beam like something remembered. Then the door shut, and it was gone. The cook kept stirring. The stranger set the bowl down gently, fingers brushing the edge, leaving behind a faint print in the oil. There was no bill, no ledger. The price was paid with silence. They stood, slow, every joint a little stiffer than when they sat. One last glance toward the others. No one returned it, and then out the door. Back into heat, back into wind. The cookhouse behind them, the town stretched ahead. Too wide, too empty, the streets more memory than movement. Somewhere far off, a hammer struck iron. Somewhere closer, a door slammed. The stranger walked on, no faster, no slower, just forward. The sun was higher now. The road was hotter. The day had not yet ended. But already it was heavier. The sun was unforgiving now, not cruel out of malice, but because it simply didn't know how to be gentle. It bore down like it always had, thoughtless, wide and everywhere at once. The kind of heat that didn't just warm the skin, but pressed against the ribs, soaked into the teeth. There were no trees in this town, no awnings deep enough, no clouds brave enough to stay. The stranger walked slow down Main Street, boots still missing, feet wrapped now in torn cloth found behind the cookhouse. Each step raised a puff of dust, lazy and soft, but it clung to the sweat already shining on their skin. The road itself was silent, the kind of silence that feels watched even if no one is there. Buildings flanked the road like worn teeth in an old jaw. Each leaned slightly, sagging with years and storms and weight that could never be measured. Signs hung from rusted chains, feed and grain, mercantile, undertaker, and rooms by the hour. Letters faded, wood warped. A town still standing, but only because no one had yet knocked it down. The stranger passed the saloon. Its doors swung gently even though no one had entered. A breeze moved through them, not refreshing, but dry, sharp at the edge, like air that had passed through too many stories. Laughter echoed from somewhere inside, muffled and wrong. Like it had been caught in the floorboards for years and was only now escaping. Across the street, the general store was shuttered. A sign hung crooked in the window. Back soon, though, the dust suggested otherwise. Beneath the sign, a chair sat empty, indent still in the seat cushion, a forgotten hat resting on the arm. A pipe lay beside it. Not broken, not cleaned, just left behind like breath that stopped before the sentence could end. The stranger paused, lifted a hand to shield their eyes. There was no real shelter here, only slices of shadow cast by buildings that didn't trust each other. Even the alleys were thin, more like cracks between memories than spaces meant to walk through. Children used to run here. You could almost hear them if you stayed quiet long enough. The thump of bare heels on packed earth, the shouts, the wooden wheels of a toy wagon rolling too fast downhill. But now, only stillness remained, baked into the ground, pressed between bricks, left behind like old chalk marks on forgotten fences. The post office door creaked. No one exited. But something shifted behind the curtain. Not enough to see, just enough to feel. The stranger moved on. A horse stood tied outside the smithy, head low, skin twitching beneath the weight of flies. It turned slightly as they passed, one eye meeting theirs, not curious, not alarmed. Just the tired recognition of another thing that didn't belong, but had to keep standing anyway. The stranger's pace slowed, not from weariness, though it had crept into their bones, but because the town itself seemed to ask for it, as if rushing would draw attention, as if hurrying would break the spell that kept everything barely stitched together. They passed a house with curtains drawn, to windows boarded up. On the porch, a rocking chair moved just slightly, though the wind had died. No one inside called out. No screen door opened, but there was a smell, something old, something warm, like bread once forgotten and now remembered too late. The sun pressed lower, crueler. There was no relief, not even in the shadows. They were too thin, too sharp, too much like things trying not to be noticed. At the far end of the street, a small chapel stood, Its steeple leaned hard to the left, cross barely clinging to its mount. The door was ajar. Not welcoming, not shut. Just left that way. Beside it, the cemetery. Small, quiet, surrounded by wood too splintered to mend. The graves were shallow and wide. Names carved with shaky hands. Some marked only with stones. Others marked with nothing at all. The stranger didn't stop. They kept walking. Past the chapel. Past the graves. Past a dog sleeping in the shade of a trough that hadn't held water in days. The dog didn't lift its head. It knew this kind of heat. Every building they passed seemed to hold its breath. Windows blinked without moving. Doors watched without sound. The town wasn't hostile. Not exactly, it was something worse. It was indifferent. Indifference, in a place like this, was heavier than hatred. It didn't care if you were lost. Didn't care if you stayed. It just didn't notice. The stranger turned down a side lane, where the ground sloped slightly downward. Sky above was white now, not blue. Bleached from staring too long at emptiness. Flies buzzed louder here. Somewhere nearby, meat was spoiling, or something was buried too shallow. The alley dead-ended at a shed, half-roofed, door off its hinge. Inside, a broken cot leaned against the far wall, and a bucket sat filled with rainwater gone green. The stranger ducked inside, sat, rested their back against the boards. It was still hot, still dry. But at least the sun couldn't reach here, at least, for now. It couldn't. They exhaled through their nose, closed their eyes, let the hum of flies and wood and memory fill their ears. The town had not rejected them, but it had not welcomed them either. In the West, that was sometimes worse. Sometimes. Silence meant you'd already been forgotten. By mid-morning, the heat no longer just settled on the skin. It pressed deeper, soaked through cloth, slid down the back in slow rivulets that itched but never cooled. It filled the mouth with grit, and the lungs with the faint taste of smoke, though nothing seemed to burn. The stranger had sat in the shade of the shed, as long as the stillness allowed. But shade in the West was borrowed, never owned, and it ran out quickly. Their tongue was thick now, not just dry, cracked. Each swallow was a struggle, as if trying to force air through cloth. They rubbed their lips with the edge of a sleeve, but the fabric only stole more moisture. A faint ache had begun at the top of their spine, radiating slow and dull into the back of the skull. They stood. Their knees gave a warning wobble, then steadied. The boots they didn't have still felt like a loss. Every step in the cloth-wrapped feet sent sharp little stones up through skin, but there was no stopping now. Thirst had a way of turning discomfort into urgency. They turned back into the lane. The buildings blinked in the sun, all edges and angles now. What little morning cool had existed was long gone, replaced by the dry shimmer of heat, lifting off rooftops like a mirage that never faded. At the edge of the road stood the water barrel. Every town had one, a cracked wooden cask lashed tight with iron bands. Squat beside the post office or the store, where animals and strangers alike came with empty hands. It stood near a dead hitching rail, beneath a long nail where once a ladle had hung. The stranger approached slow, not cautious, just afraid of hope. The barrel was darker than the sunlit dust around it, its shadow a crooked bruise stretching across the ground. The rim was warped with time. Someone had scratched initials there long ago, just the faint remains of a T in something else, washed soft by sun and years. They stepped beside it, listened first, as if water might whisper, then leaned over, placing one hand on the rim, the other bracing against a knee, and looked inside. Nothing. Not even dampness. Just the curve of bone-dry wood, sun-faded and hollow. No spiders, no leaf litter. Not even a stain where liquid might have once rested. It was as if the barrel had never known water at all. The stranger stood motionless, hands still curled against the wood. A breath left them. Not a sigh. Too dry for that. Just air, pushed out slow, like disappointment turning to habit. Behind them, the road stretched in both directions. Left led back toward the saloon, right trailed toward the outskirts. To the dry fields, the hills where fences had long ago collapsed inward. They turned. A child watched from a porch nearby, barefoot, knees muddy, a string tied round one finger like they were trying to remember something. The stranger met their eyes. The child didn't smile, didn't blink, leaned back slightly into the shadow of the doorway. Even the children here knew not to speak when the barrel was dry. The stranger moved on. Behind the store, there was a trough, wider, lined in iron, shaded under a warped awning. A dog lay beside it, tongue flat, ribs heaving. Its eyes flicked toward the stranger. But again, no sound, no bark. Just the dull, shared understanding of being too thirsty to make noise. The trough was empty too. Dust curled in its corners. Something small skittered across the rim. A lizard or beetle, gone before it could be seen. The stranger sat beside it anyway. Let their back rest against the post. Let the silence sink into their chest and stay there. A wagon rolled by in the street beyond. Wheels clacked over stone. The driver held the reins loose, eyes squinting under the brim of a hat nearly as tired as he was. He didn't stop. No one ever stopped. The stranger touched their lips again, not for comfort, just to remember. Memories of water were dangerous. They made you believe things were possible. The well sat 2 buildings down, behind the chapel. A crooked rope coiled around its base like a sleeping snake. No bucket. Just the yawning blackness of the shaft, waiting like a mouth that never gave anything back.
Ow.
They passed it without looking. A different man, different walk. Fast, angry. His boots slapped the wood with purpose. He didn't see the stranger, didn't stop. He turned the corner and disappeared into sunlight. Behind the saloon, time didn't move forward. It hovered. It waited for stories to end, not to begin. And in that stillness, beneath the low shadows and sour wind, the stranger finally let their shoulders fall. No one was chasing them, but no one was waiting either. The alley stretched wide in the quiet, wide enough to feel like a grave if you sat too long. They wouldn't sit long. But for now, in the cool of this forgotten space, they could almost remember something softer. The sound of hands in wash water, the feel of glass not yet broken, the warmth of a trough full enough to drink without shame. Almost, but not quite. The back of the saloon never gave you peace, only pause. And pause was just long enough to remember how much the day still had left. At the end of the lane, where the saloon gave way to silence and the wind lost interest in wandering, sat a 2-story house with curtains always drawn. The paint had once been pale blue, now it was a tired gray, the kind that clings to memory like old perfume on a silk glove. Its porch sagged inward at the center, worn soft by heels and hesitation. A bell hung on a rusted bracket near the door. No clapper inside, no sound left to make. This was Miss Addie's place. Not a brothel, not exactly. Not anymore. But not a home either. It was something in between, a quiet room in a loud town. A place where things weren't quite sold and weren't quite given. A place to sit and remember being softer, again if it cost you. The stranger came with the sun behind their shoulders, casting a long shadow up the porch steps. No one called out. No invitation came. But the door was ajar, always ajar, and the smell drifted through like breath, rose water, lemon soap, and dust warmed by lamplight. Inside, the parlor was dim. The curtains let in only the thinnest light, laced through with embroidered ivy. Furniture that hadn't been moved in years sat waiting in corners, a velvet settee, dark walnut sideboard, a cabinet full of mismatched china. A gramophone perched on a cloth-draped table, its horn cracked but still beautiful, like a voice gone hoarse with love. The stranger stood for a moment, just past the threshold, eyes adjusting. Floorboards creaked above, slow, careful step. Someone crossing a bedroom with no rush left in their life. The air was still, warm, thick like honey. A fly buzzed against the lace curtain, bounced once, then fell silent. Miss Addie appeared in the archway. She didn't speak at first, just looked. Her dress was dark, plum, faded but clean. Her hair pinned high, though loose at the temple. Fingers wrapped in lace gloves. Not new, not matching, but graceful all the same. She wore no perfume beyond what lived in the house itself. She didn't need to. "You need water?" she asked, voice low, not unkind. The stranger nodded once. She disappeared through another door. The stranger sat. Carefully, The settee let out a long sigh beneath their weight. A cushion shifted, releasing a faint burst of lavender and dust. It smelled like comfort too long withheld. On the wall opposite, a painting hung tilted. A woman at a riverbank, her back to the viewer, head turned just slightly toward the horizon. Her dress was caught in the wind. The room stayed quiet. Even the clock had stopped ticking. Miss Addie returned with a porcelain cup. Not chipped. Not stained. Blue roses painted along the rim. She handed it over without ceremony. The water was cold. Cold enough to bite. The stranger drank it slow, grateful without speaking. Miss Addie sat across from them, not too close. She didn't ask questions. Not about names. Not about where they'd come from. Not about what they were running toward or running from. She just watched the way their hand trembled on the handle and said, "You can stay a while. If you know how to sit quiet." Stranger nodded again. She rose, disappeared down the hall, left them there in the parlor, in that gentle, dim world where sound softened at the corners and light never quite touched the floor. The stranger leaned back, let the settee cradle their spine. Their eyes closed. Somewhere, a wind-up music box played a song with no name, just for notes, again and again, like the house itself was humming to remember something it couldn't quite hold. Because the people who had looked too long, too hard, had fallen in before. Thirst had its own gravity, and the West didn't always pull you back. At the edge of the town, past a crooked fence and a patch of brittle weeds, an old cistern stood. Some said it still held water after storms. The stranger didn't believe that. Storms didn't come anymore, but they walked there anyway, one foot in front of the other, each step drier than the last. The cistern was covered by a slab of rusted metal. A rock rested atop it. Pointless weight. No one was stealing from it, not anymore. The stranger lifted the slab slow. The iron groaned. Inside, nothing. Dry stone, spiderwebs. A single pale feather curled in the dust. They stared a long time, not at the emptiness, but at what that emptiness meant. The sun climbed higher. Sky offered no relief. And in the quiet of the day, the stranger realized something most in the West learned too late. It wasn't the heat that killed you. It was the hope. The hope that this barrel would be different. That this time, it might still be enough. The saloon looked different from the back. From the front, it still had a kind of shape, a lean charm. Worn wood and swinging doors, its sign hanging loose by one chain, like a wink too tired to finish. The glass out front was always smeared but whole. Music spilled from it on some nights. Laughter, too. Though both were brittle, both always seemed to end too fast. But behind it was where the town's heartbeat really lay. Where bottles were broken and not swept up. Where boots left streaks in mud that never dried right. Where the ground held stories no one said aloud. Pressed deep into the dirt, layered like old lies. The stranger walked slowly around the side. Boots still missing, feet wrapped tight but aching now. The smell hit before the view. Stale beer, wet wood, something sharp beneath it. Not blood exactly, but close. A low fence lined the alleyway behind the building. Beyond it, a trash heap slumped in the sun. Chicken bones, a broken crate, some scraps of cloth darkened with grease, or worse. Buzzards circled somewhere higher up, invisible in the light, but always waiting. There was movement near the back door. A man, heavy-set, hands like shovels, stood with one shoulder propped against the frame. His eyes were closed, his hat low. A toothpick shifted between his lips. Wasn't sleeping, just saving energy. Watching the door in case someone opened it wrong. The stranger didn't approach him. Instead, they kept to the wall, following the narrow edge, where the boards cast just enough shade to keep skin from peeling. There were crates stacked back here, some full, some split open. Oranges gone soft, bottles with no corks, sacks of flour crusted at the seams. A rat darted across a broken plank and vanished. Behind the saloon was where the fights ended, where breath left the body and nobody helped it back in. Blood had dried in the cracks of the ground, not fresh, not old, just familiar. A dark stain stretched across the dirt like a shadow without a body. Flies moved over it in slow spirals, not hurried. They'd fed before. The stranger paused near the water trough meant for horses. It was mostly dry now. Just a finger's width of water clung to one side, green at the edge. Still, they bent slowly, careful with the knees, and cupped a hand into what was left. It wasn't clean, it wasn't cold, but it touched the tongue like mercy. And that was enough. They didn't drink more, just once. A small swallow. More ritual than relief. The back door opened. The man in the frame didn't move, but someone else stepped out. A younger woman. Tall sleeves rolled up to the elbow, apron streaked with things you don't wash out. She held a bucket in one hand. The other rubbed her neck slow, as if trying to massage sleep from a place it never reached. She saw the stranger, didn't speak. Just studied them with tired eyes, then dumped the bucket contents beside the crates. A rush of water, thick with soap and other things, ran down the alley. Pooling near the trough and curling around the bloodstain like fingers reaching for something long lost. She turned back inside, didn't close the door. Didn't invite either. The stranger watched her disappear. Watched the man with the toothpick shift once and then go still again. Nothing rushed in the west. Not even warnings. The sun had slipped behind the saloon's roof now. The back alley fell into partial shade. The kind that looked like kindness, but didn't last. A barrel of broken glass sat near the far wall. Colored shards shimmered at the top. Green, brown, a glint of blue. The stranger stepped near, caught the edge of a reflection in one curved piece. A face stared back, dirt-streaked, eyes red at the corners, skin dull as sand. Not a stranger at all, just someone too tired to be recognized. They turned away. Further down, behind the smokehouse, a dog howled once, sharp and fast. Then silence, not even birds in the eaves. The stranger sat near the crates, arms around knees. Listened to the air hum. Let the smell of sour mash and pine soap and copper settle over them like a second skin. A screen door clattered open again. Footsteps. Boots this time. A dog barked somewhere far off. The wind rattled the fence post chain, then fell still. The woman stood, but not quickly, as if even standing had to be earned. She walked to the gate and looked down the road. Nothing coming, not even dust. I told him, she said, barely above breath, you don't touch what lives in the dark. You let it stay there. The stranger glanced at the canvas. It fluttered once in the breeze. The boy didn't move. His mouth had closed. Crow landed on the far post. Watched. Said nothing. The woman sat in the dirt, dress fanning out around her. She pulled the rag through her fingers, stared into the road again. There was no point in staying. But there was no way to leave without carrying the weight of it. They turned, stepped back onto the path, walked slow. Each footfall felt louder now. The sky too wide, the wind too still. Behind them, the woman sat. The boy lay, the crow watched, and the west. The west just waited, like it always did. At midday, the sun stopped pretending to move. It settled over the town like a lid on a boiling pot, trapping the air, pressing it downward until even the wind gave up. Not a breeze moved through the lanes now. Not a door creaked. Not a bird called. The stranger found their way to the back of the supply shed. It was half open, half buried, the tin roof resting like a broken wing on slanted beams. No lock on the door, no sign to warn. Just rust curling like a scar down the hinges, and a single jug beside the steps with nothing inside but dead ants. They ducked inside. The air was darker here, close and sour, thick with the smell of burlap and sweat. A few crates lined the walls, one split open, showing tools meant for fields that hadn't seen water in years. The floor was dirt, packed hard, dry as bone, scattered with nails and buttons and things too small to count. The roof hummed. Not loud, just steady. A low, endless hum, the kind you don't hear until it's inside you, until it lives beneath your skin. The stranger sank down into the shadow behind the largest crate, backsliding against the wall, knees pulled tight. A wave of nausea passed, not strong, just stubborn. The kind that didn't break you, but lingered long enough to remind you you'd already been broken. Their breathing slowed, not by choice, because the heat did that. It stole the speed from breath. Stole thoughts. Too, if you weren't careful. They leaned their head back against the wall, felt the warm press of wood against scalp. The skin behind their ears burned now, nose peeling. Lips cracked into lines that would never smooth again. The hum continued. Above them, the tin roof expanded with the heat, creaked, shifted, not enough to fall. Just enough to say, "I remember storms." The stranger closed their eyes, and in the dark saw color. Orange, mostly. The way light looks through a shut eyelid when it's too bright outside to dream. Sweat clung to their neck, gathered in the hollow of the throat. It pooled along the spine, soaked the back of their shirt, stuck their collar to the skin. Each breath brought no relief, just more air, too hot to feel like air. They drifted, not into sleep, not really. More like a trance, at a kind that comes when the body's too tired to argue and the mind has nothing left to say. In the haze of almost sleep, they saw something. Not a memory, not quite. A shape. Thin hands cupping water in a basin, the sound of a washcloth wrung out over a tin bowl, fingers pressing gently behind an ear, wiping sweat away. They reached for it, but the memory pulled back. Like all things out here, it didn't stay long. A noise. A crack. The roof popped, heat lifting one edge and dropping it again like a breath too shallow to hold. The stranger flinched, then stilled. Stillness. That was the only way to survive noon. You didn't move. You didn't speak. You let the heat pass through you like time, like pain. In the corner of the shed, a spider moved. Its web was stretched between a beam and the wall, thin and shimmering in the slant of sun that made it through a hole in the roof. The stranger watched it climb. Slow, careful, each leg placed with purpose. Even spiders knew better than to rush. Outside, the sky buzzed with silence, not the absence of sound, but the weight of it. The hum of insects deep in the grass, the creak of boards that weren't being touched, the distant whine of something metal left in the sun too long. Everything was waiting. Even time itself. The stranger's body began to ache differently now. Not from walking, not from thirst, but from the kind of exhaustion that lived in the bones. The kind that whispered, "Lie down." Just for a minute, they didn't, not fully, but their head dropped forward, chin to chest. The tin roof above them clicked again. The hum had grown louder now, or maybe they'd just stopped resisting it. There was no breeze, no prayer, only sweat and dust, and the weight of a sun that did not care who remembered it. They sat in that heat as if buried, still, dry, and half forgotten. Sleep came slow, not peace, not rest, but something in between. A pause, a breath, a moment without sound. And in the heat beneath that humming tin roof, that was enough. By the time the stranger stood again, the sun had dropped just far enough to stop screaming. The edge of the day had begun to soften, curling under like paper left along near a flame. The shed groaned as they left it, but no one saw them go. No one ever saw anything from behind closed shutters at this hour. Only shadows moved now, long and thin, like memories stretching before they vanished. The path to the undertaker's door wasn't marked. Didn't need to be. Every town like this had one. It's always quiet, always cool, set apart just slightly from the row of other buildings. Not by distance, but by stillness. There were no signs, no hours, no lanterns lit at the threshold. Just a door that never locked, and a window that never quite reflected the light, right? The stranger walked slow, feet dragging just slightly through the dust. The wind was low now, rising only to kick at the ground, not to speak. They followed the alley where the fence broke in two, stepped past a gate made from mismatched planks, one nailed with a bent horseshoe, the other scorched with something that might have been a brand once, but now was just a burn. The undertaker sat out front, always did. It was thin, not frail, sharp around the collar. Dark coat, eyes that squinted not from suspicion but habit. His hands were folded on his lap, long fingers streaked with ink and old stain. Didn't look up when the stranger arrived. Didn't nod. Just kept his gaze on the horizon, on a piece of nothing that never moved. The bench he sat on was too low, sagged in the middle. One leg shorter than the others, so it tilted just enough to feel temporary, but it had been there longer than the road. People said it was built with leftover coffin wood. Others said it was older than that. Made from the bones of trees no one could name any more. The stranger didn't speak. They sat. Not beside the undertaker, but near enough. Close enough that the silence stretched between them, like thread pulled tight. Time passed. Or maybe it didn't. The sky turned dull gold, then a bruised lavender at the edges. The sun no longer burned. It glowed low and wide and seemed unsure whether it wanted to set at all. From inside the house, nothing stirred. No sound of tools, no hammering, no names being etched. The undertaker finally spoke. "You passing through?" Not a question, just something to say. The stranger didn't answer. There was nothing new to add to a line that had been said 1,000 times. Passing through, staying over, hiding under, dying slow.
And they all meant the same thing out here. The undertaker nodded once, just barely.
He looked down at his hands, rubbed a thumb across his palm. Dried blood under the nail, or ink, or both. He didn't seem to notice. "Ain't many funerals these days," he said. "Not proper ones, anyway. Just holes and dirt, and maybe a rock if someone's feeling generous." He glanced sideways, not at the stranger. At the space near their feet, most folks don't leave enough behind to be remembered, named sometimes. But even that blows off the stone after a few years. Wind takes it, or the sun. The stranger leaned back. The bench didn't creak. It didn't have to. Everything in this place already made the sound of endings. Inside the workshop, shadows stretched across the floorboards. A single oil lamp flickered on the desk, casting orange light against the shelves lined with jars. Not many tools, not anymore. Just the ones that still worked. A hammer, a chisel, spool of twine, a needle, threaded but dulled. "They say you don't feel it when you die out here," the undertaker murmured. "They say it's quick." He turned his head, slowly, eyes landing on the stranger like someone remembering. A name they never spoke aloud, but I don't believe. That, he looked away again. "I think the land takes you piece by piece. Not all at once, not clean. It takes your voice first, then your face, then the stories folks told about you. And by the time your body goes, well, you're already gone." The stranger shifted. Barely dust moved around their boots. A bell rang far off, not a church bell. Not proper. Just a rusted bit of iron on a rope, swaying from the breeze. A warning or a call, it's hard to say. The undertaker rested his elbows on his knees. "Had a man last week. Came in alone. Said he was looking for someone. Never said who. I buried him 3 days later. Never found what he came for." The stranger didn't ask what killed him. Out here, death didn't need reasons. It just waited. The undertaker stood. He didn't offer anything. Not shelter. Not advice. Not water. He just walked to the door and opened it slow. Light spilled out onto the dirt, soft and gold.
What?
Inside, the room looked the same as it always had. Orderly, cold, patient. He left the door open. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't say stay. Just let the night come in. Let it find its way around the drawers that didn't open anymore and the bench that didn't creak. The stranger stayed a while longer, watched the sun give up the last of its color, watched the wind change direction, watched the dust settle on. Their hands like ashdot, and for a moment, it was easy to forget what day it had been, or if it had ever started at all. The door to the gunsmith shop was never locked. There wasn't much need. Not in a place where everyone already knew who owned what, and what happened if you took it without asking. But it wasn't wide open either, just left slightly ajar, as if the heat had swollen the frame one summer and it never quite fit right again. The stranger pushed it with the flat of a hand. It groaned low, a long, tired creak, like an animal waking from the wrong kind of sleep. Inside, the air was close. Cooler than outside, but not by mercy, only because the windows had been blacked out with old waxed cloth. Light came in slanted thin, like it had to earn its place. The smell hit first gun oil. Metal, burnt powder, with dust. Not sharp, it's just heavy. The scent of things kept ready. It wasn't a big place. One long counter, nicked and stained from years. Of careful violence, a wall behind it hung with rifles and frames, some polished, some rusted, none for show. Hooks held belts and empty holsters. There were drawers beneath the shelves, labels long faded, .36, .44 spare caps, brass cases. Old triggers with no names, The stranger didn't touch anything. Touching was permission. Out here, silence meant. Safety and silence was kept with still hands. From the back room, shape stirred. The gunsmith stepped into view. She was older than she looked, tall leather apron across her chest, worn smooth where hands had wiped for decades. Her fingers were blackened at the tips, and one eye carried a glass sheen milky, with a ring of yellow where color used to be. She didn't blink much. She glanced at the stranger, just once, then back to the tool in her hand, a fine brush. Short-bristled, working the gears of a disassembled cylinder spread across a velvet mat. "What do you need?" she asked, voice low, the words shaped like they'd been chewed before being spoken. The stranger didn't answer right away. They took a step closer, let the smell of oil and lead wrap around them like smoke. Their eyes moved across the table, where parts lay in careful pieces, the heart of a weapon undone. "Sleeping. Something clean," they said. The gunsmith nodded once. She understood. She always did. She moved to a small cabinet beneath the counter. Hands steady, opened the drawer with a flick of the wrist, pulled out a wrapped bundle cloth around steel. She laid it down gently. 6-shot. .36 new barrel. Action's light. Fire straight if you don't rush. The stranger unwrapped it slowly. The revolver gleamed, but not too much. It'd been polished but not dressed up. No engraving, no shine for shine's sake. The kind of weapon meant to do its work and rest without complaint. They lifted it heavy, but balanced. The grip fit the hand like memory. There was no weight like this weight. A kind of quiet strength. The gunsmith watched with her good eye. She didn't speak again. She didn't ask what it was for. No one came here unless they already knew. Beside the weapon, she laid down a pouch of paper cartridges, 20 hand-rolled, tied tight with twine. "I won't ask what you owe," she said. "You'll pay if you can." Stranger nodded once. That was enough. The pouch went into a coat pocket. The cloth went back around the iron, tied quick, carried loose. A weapon wasn't drawn often out here, but when it was, it didn't need. To announce itself, the stranger turned to leave. "Wait." The gunsmith moved back to the bench, picked up something small, a tin of grease, soft and black. She handed it over with 2 fingers. "Barrel dry out by nightfall. Eats. Oil. Keep her clean, or she'll turn on you." The stranger took it, put it in the other pocket. Didn't say thank you. That wasn't needed either. They stepped back into the street. The light had changed again. Golden now, low and slanting, touching the tops of things, letting shadows stretch long across the dirt. The revolver weighed differently than thirst. Or grief or hunger, it was a choice. Even if the choice never came, the stranger walked slow, steps quieter now, measured by the rhythm of new weight at their hip. Down the street, a dog barked once. Shutter slammed. A window blinked closed. The town could feel it when iron changed hands. Not everyone knew why, but everyone felt it out here. Metal whispered louder than words, and sometimes whispered first. The revolver sat quiet at the stranger's side, still wrapped in cloth, still untouched by the heat. But its weight had shifted something in the way they walked. Not pride, not power, just readiness. The road ahead felt longer now, though it hadn't changed. The same dry trail cutting west through the edge of the town. Between fences leaning like they'd been sighing for decades, they passed the last house slowly. Its windows were shuttered, its porch swept clean, but the rocking chair out front sat still, unmoved by breeze or time. A single boot lay beside it, old leather cracked white with sun. The one came out. No one watched them go. The dirt road sloped downward beyond the edge of the town, then rose again, toward the horizon, a ribbon of dust tied between silence and memory. The fields on either side were yellow and brittle, not wheat, not corn. Just ghost growth. What once lived, now only held shape. And somewhere between the last step past the fence and the third bend in the road, the dog appeared. It didn't bark, didn't charge, didn't move. Just stood in the middle of the path, black, low to the ground, lean with hunger. Its ears pointed forward. Its eyes were the color of old coins, not gold, not brown, just tarnished with time. The stranger stopped, not out of fear, yet just that quiet instinct that rises when something unnatural feels too familiar. The dog tilted its head, almost curious. Its tail didn't wag. Its body didn't sway. It was so still, it almost looked painted into the road, part of the dust and dusk. Something imagined between footfalls. The stranger blinked. The dog was gone, but the feeling remained. They kept walking. Slower now. Every few steps, their eyes flicked to the side. Toward the fence line, toward the rocks, toward the curve of the trail behind them. Nothing moved, but the quiet had changed. No birds. No bugs. Just breath. Just steps. Just the dull drag of cloth. Over skin. At the top of the rise, the stranger paused again. The town behind them looked smaller than it should have. Flat, sun-washed still, no smoke from chimneys, no shape in the windows. Just the wide, dry breath of distance stretching in every direction. They turned forward again, and the dog stood 10 feet away, closer, still silent, its head lowered, just slightly now. Front paws spread, not a growl, not a threat, just a presence. The stranger didn't speak, didn't reach for the revolver. They knew better. Some things followed, not to harm but to. Remember the dog move then? Slowly it stepped to the side of the trail, sat down in the grass, watched. Blinked once. The stranger walked past it. The air grew thicker. There was no sun now, not because it had set, but because the dust in the sky had turned the light to gold. Then gray, then nothing, and behind them they could hear the soft pad of paws. Following, not chasing, not rushing, just keeping pace. Every few steps. The stranger glanced over their shoulder. The road behind was always empty, the grass always still, but they could feel it. That gentle pull in the spine, that low weight behind the ribs, like being watched by something that used to know you. The road curved again, its time toward the dried creek bed. Cracked mud, like shattered glass, stretched in wide patterns across the bank. Bones scattered deer, cow, something older. The stranger stepped lightly over the edge. Their wrapped feet left soft prints in the dust, and in the mud beside them, another set of prints, peered paw prints, deep, fresh. They stopped walking, and the prints stopped too. The stranger turned around, nothing. No sound. Only sky. But the dog was there, somewhere, not to bite, not to bark, just to witness. Some said the West was haunted by the people it forgot. Others said it was haunted by the ones who tried too hard to remember. The stranger stood still, hand brushing the cloth over the revolver. Not to draw it, not now, just to feel it, to remember what it meant. And in that silence, the dog's presence faded. Not footsteps away, not a rustle in the grass. Just gone, like it had never been there. But the prints remained, and the air had shifted. The stranger kept walking. The road stretched on. No destination, no signs, just a path the color of bone, and a sky too wide to hold anything but silence. And somewhere behind them, whether in shadow or in memory, the dog still followed, behind the boarding house. Past the wire line hung with limp cotton and the stump where no tree had grown since the second fire, stood the laundry shed, la-roofed, wide-doored, slanted. With the weight of all the years it had been ignored, the hinges were quiet now, rust silenced by time. The door swung inward with the push of a hand, slow and reluctant, like even it didn't want to speak too loud. Inside it was hot, not with. The open sun, but with steam, stale and sour, rising from basins lined with gray water, heavy with ash soap and worn skin. The air smelled of lye linen, and something faintly metallic, like blood that had dried on cloth, and been soaked too long in silence. 3 women worked inside. Not quickly, it's not slow, just steady. I sat, legs crossed under her apron, pulling. Thread through a pair of torn trousers, her hands were red from bleach, knuckles swollen at the joints. She held the needle like it owed her something. Each pass of the thread was exact, clean. Practiced, another woman stirred a tub with a wooden rod, sleeves rolled to the elbow. Her arms were strong. Not the kind of strength made to lift, but the kind made to endure. She leaned forward over the steam, eyes narrowed against the burn, jaw set. She hadn't blinked in minutes. The third woman, younger, maybe, or just quieter, pinned shirts to the line strung between rafters. Her movements were slow, reverent almost. She touched each shirt like it had been worn by someone she once knew. The stranger stood just inside the doorway. The women didn't startle, didn't pause. They'd seen worse. They'd stitched worse. They'd cleaned worse from cotton and flesh alike. Shirt or skin? The seated woman asked, not looking up. The stranger said nothing at first, then loosened the coat. The linen beneath was torn at the shoulder, a gash, not deep but long, black at the edge, red beneath. The kind of wound that came not from a bullet, but from something sharp and quick. Something meant to scare more than kill. Shirt, then, the woman said. She rose, gestured to a stool in the corner. The stranger sat. The air inside felt thicker. Now, like each breath needed to be chewed before it could be swallowed. The woman crossed the room, took a pair of scissors from the peg, and knelt beside the stranger. "Won't be pretty," she said, "but nothing out here is." She cut away the fabric. The sound was soft tearing thread, parting cotton, the sigh of a garment giving up. Beneath, the skin was torn in a crescent. Dried blood flaked along the edge. She dipped a cloth in a basin beside her. The water was already gray. Didn't matter. She pressed it to the wound. The stranger flinched, but didn't speak. Behind them, the tub continued to steam. The second woman stirred it with a rhythm that matched nothing. Not memory, just muscle. The younger woman hung another shirt, then paused. She turned, looked at the stranger. Her gaze was soft, not curious. She had freckles across her cheek like drops of clay pressed into porcelain. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She said nothing, just returned to the line. Cloth came away red. The woman rinsed it, wiped again, then reached for her needle. "This'll hurt," she said. She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait for a nod. The first stitch bit deep. The second. Faster. She worked without tremble. Thread pulled tight, knotted at each turn. Her face was still, eyes steady. Her hands told the story. 6 stitches, no more. When it was done, she tied off the end and wiped the skin again, then pressed a square of muslin over the seam. "Leave it open to air," she said. "Wrap it at night. Won't stop the hurt, but it'll keep the flies off." She stood, dropped the cloth into the bucket. The stranger pulled the coat back on the shoulder. Burned, but it was a clean kind of burn now. The kind that came from something closing, not breaking. The women returned to their work. No thanks expected. No payment asked. Behind the steam and the soap, they had mended worse. Men shot in the belly, boys with hands crushed by gear, girls who came in weeping and left without words. Blood on cotton was just part of the job. The stranger lingered a moment longer, watched the younger woman hang the last shirt, pale blue, threadbare at the sleeves, buttons missing. She pinned it slow, smoothed the fabric once with the back of her hand, then stepped away. The air inside the shed shifted, the steam lifted, the silence returned. Outside, a wind stirred the dirt. Inside, nothing moved. The stranger stepped back through. The door, into heat, into dust. Back onto the road with a fresh ache and a shoulder sewn shut. Behind them, the laundry shed stayed still. A room for mending, not healing, but out here. That was the closest anyone came. It started with a smell. Not strong, not sharp, just the faintest edge of something wrong, carried on the breeze like a whisper. The stranger had only just stepped past the far fence of the boarding house when it found them. A dry, acrid scent that curled in the nose and stayed there. Not quite wood smoke, not quite oil, but old. And final, the wind had picked up. Not enough to cool the skin, but enough to stir the world. Loose grit moved across the road like thoughtless footsteps. Laundry flapped on the lines, slow and hollow. The kind of breeze that doesn't whistle or rush, just pushes softly and keeps pushing. They stopped and lifted their face slightly toward the sky. The sun had lowered, sitting heavy above the hills now, bleeding yellow into orange. Shadows stretched longer than truth, and the wind carried the scent in waves, thickening with each breath. There were no bells, no warnings. Nothing that told the town what it should already know. But something was burning, and it wasn't far. The stranger moved with the air now, toward the edge of the town, where the land opened out into brittle grass and ruins of fences. The road curved right and rose slightly, enough to let the sky widen, enough to let the scent grow bolder. By the time they reached the top of the hill, ashes were visible, not as flame, not as smoke, just residue, gray streaks in the air, pale flecks that moved without falling, kind of ash that came from something old, something that hadn't meant to catch fire, but had anyway. It felt like snow. But snow had never felt this warm, or this sad. A small barn stood at the bottom of the slope, or what was left of it, black beams like ribs stuck from the earth. The roof had collapsed inward, the stone chimney leaning as if someone had pushed too hard on one side. Smoke curled from the ruins, not rising, just sitting low, close to the ground. Thick and lazy. No one stood beside it. No one ran for water. Whatever had burned had already finished. The stranger descended slow, step by step, feet, careful in the dust and char. The ashes stuck to the fabric of their trousers, streaked their sleeves, settled in their hair like forgotten dust from some place they'd been before. The smell was heavier now. Wood, yes, but more than that. Oil, rope, something sweet beneath it all. Maybe lavender. Maybe something someone had kept in a drawer for too long. The barn had held things, not just hay, not just tools, memories, things. Too soft to survive flame, near the entrance a rocking chair had fallen sideways in the dirt. Its arms half burned, the seat blackened and curling at the edge. A doll lay beside it. No face left. It's just fabric and string, scorched into silence. The stranger stood still, watched the last of the smoke drift upward, then slide away on the breeze. Somewhere, nearby, a chicken clucked once, hoarse and confused. Somewhere further, a door slammed, distant, startled, but not surprised. This wasn't the first fire, and it wouldn't be the last. The West didn't warn you. It just took what it wanted. Ash didn't care what it had been. It only remembered the weight. The stranger crouched near the edge of the ruin, reached into the dirt, picked up a piece of something small, a pin, maybe, or the tip of a burned latch. It was warm still. It's not hot. Just enough to tell a story. They closed their hand around it, held it there, not for use, not for anything, just because it was left behind them. The wind rose again, and this time it truly carried ash. Flakes touched their cheek, danced across their shoulders, fell into their coat like unwanted prayers. The town didn't notice. No one shouted, no one ran. Maybe the barn had been abandoned, or maybe everyone had already decided it. Didn't matter. That was the thing about fire here. It never felt like an emergency, only an end. The stranger stood again, looked back once toward the wall. Blackened beams. Nothing stirred, not even embers. The fire had finished its story and left only smoke to tell the ending. The wind shifted. And just like that, as the ash moved on, so did the stranger. They didn't speak, didn't wonder aloud, only walked through the settling gray, toward whatever hadn't burned yet. The air was quieter after the fire. Not safer, not cooler, just quiet, like the wind had spent itself and now waited to see what would come next. The stranger walked slow beneath a sky fading from copper to violet, the color of bruised fruit left too long on the sill. Each step sent little clouds of ash swirling up from the road, soft and low like secrets being exhaled. Their coat hung heavier now. Ash settled in the creases. Scent of smoke had sewn itself into the collar, into the lining, into the memory of what they'd just left behind. They walked without aim, not toward water, not toward rest, just away, away from flame, away from what had once stood at the edge of town. Where the last fence post leaned and the signs had all faded blank, the strangers stopped. Their breath had slowed, but something restless moved beneath the quiet. A pull, a pause. Something not quite remembered but near. They reached into their coat pocket, the inner one. The one sewn crooked by another hand, long ago. Their fingers. Touched paper, folded, worn at the corners. A letter. They hadn't put it there, not that they remembered. But the feel of it was familiar, like a childhood blanket found at the bottom of a chest. Or the sound of someone humming a song you'd only ever heard once. The paper was soft with age. The folds had been pressed and reopened too many times. The ink had blurred just slightly, not enough to make it unreadable, just enough to suggest that someone had wept too close to it. Or maybe the ink had run from time alone. They didn't open it yet first. They stood still. The town behind them breathed in its sleep, doors shut. Lanterns dimmed, windows glowing with the hush of night routines. No one saw them now. Not really. Just a shape at the edge of the road, where dust and dusk became the same color. Then they unfolded the paper, slowly, as if it might fall apart in their hands. The writing is thin, slanted, careful in the way people write when they think it might be the last thing they say. The kind of words written by candlelight on a surface that moved beneath the hand. No date, no name at the top. Just the middle of a sentence, as if it had started long before and would keep going even if no one read it. Double quotes, ... if you find this. It means I didn't make it as far as I hoped. The stranger's breath caught just slightly in their chest. They kept reading. There's a tree near the bluff. You'll know it by the split in the trunk. I buried the key. Beneath it? Not because I wanted it hidden, just because I couldn't carry it anymore. A key to what? To where? There was no map, no directions, just the words, no request, no promise, no goodbye, only the weight of having been left behind. I always thought I'd come back for it. But then again, I always thought I'd come back. The letter ended there. No signature, no sender, no more. The stranger held the page a moment longer, his fingers trembling slightly from the long ache in their shoulder, the one sewn shut just. Hours before, the stitches had dried now, tugging tight when they breathed too deep. They folded the letter again, just as it had been, corner over edge, crease pressed firm with the side of a thumb. It slipped back into the coat like it had never left. A weight too light to notice until you couldn't let go of it. Somewhere. Behind them, a bell chimed once. The chapel, maybe. Or a rusted cowbell swinging in the wind. The town didn't care. The letter hadn't been written for it. The road ahead curved toward the hills. The stranger knew the bluff. Everyone did. Wasn't far. A half-day's walk, maybe less. If you didn't get turned around, if you didn't lose the path in the sand, they looked down at their hands. Ash still streaked across the knuckles, dirt beneath the nails. Blood from earlier dried in a pattern like lace, dark and delicate on the inside of the wrist. They let their hand fall to their side, adjusted the weight of the coat, then walked, not fast, not urgent, just forward toward a tree that might not be there, toward a key that might not unlock anything, toward a story that might never have belonged to them. In the first place, but out here, sometimes all you had was a letter someone else forgot to send, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, you were the one meant to read it. The hills were nothing more than long. Slow rises covered in dead grass, the kind that rustled without wind and held shadows too early in the day. The stranger followed the road as it bent, the dust lifting with each step, then settling quietly behind. As if it too didn't want to be noticed, the letter stayed in their pocket. Warm now from the heat of their body, edges soft from being. Touched again and again, but they didn't read it this time. They didn't need to. The words had already worked their way into the back of their mind, threading through thought like needlework. They could still feel the last sentence, sharp and hollow. I always thought I'd come back. The road grew thinner here. More path than trail. Sagebrush lined the edges. Some brittle, some bowed, some clinging still to the illusion of green. The sky above had paled into evening, No longer gold, not yet dark. Just dim, like the world had been rubbed with ash dotted. Then, at the crest of the next hill, she was there. A girl, standing still in the middle of the path. Small, maybe 7, maybe 10. Her dress was simple, the hem torn in one place. Dust streaked the fabric. Her hair was long, tangled, heavy with dirt, like it had been combed only by the wind. She didn't move as the stranger approached. Didn't run, didn't smile. Just watched. The stranger slowed. Their steps softened. They paused 10 feet away. The girl tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something too quiet for anyone else to hear. Her hands stayed at her sides, no fear in her face, but no comfort either. "Evenin'," the stranger said. Their voice sounded rough. Even to their own ears, hoarse from smoke, dry from ash, softened by dust and distance. The girl didn't answer. She just blinked once, slowly, and then turned, not with haste. Not like someone retreating, just shifting, like a leaf on the wind. She walked off the path, down the slope. Her bare feet made no sound in the dry grass. She didn't look back, and the stranger followed. Not because they meant to, not because they trusted, but because something in her silence felt older than the hills. The trail curved into a shallow gully, hidden between 2 leaning rocks, a place not found by accident. The kind of place people passed by 100 times. Never knowing it was there, she led them to a grove of scrub trees, low-branched and bent from weather. Beneath them, the light dimmed further, shadows thickened, the ground cooler now, softer. She sat just like that, on the earth, legs crossed, hands resting in her lap. The stranger stood still, watched, waited. Double quotes, "You've got the letter." She said her voice was clear, soft, but not young. Not in the way children usually sound. More like someone remembering childhood from far away. The stranger nodded. She looked down, picked at something in the grass. "You'll go to the tree," she said. "You'll dig, and there'll be a key." "How do you know?" stranger asked. The girl shrugged. "I saw it once." She said it like one might say it rained yesterday. Simple, certain. The stranger looked at the grove. It was still. The wind didn't reach here. No birds sang. The air smelled faintly of earth and something else. Lavender, maybe. Or sage crushed underfoot a long time ago. "I don't remember you," the stranger said. The girl didn't respond. She just lifted a hand and pointed to the edge of the trees. "There," she said. "That way." Her eyes met the stranger's again. Dust clung to her lashes. Her pupils were wide, too wide for the light. "It's not locked anymore," she whispered. "But you should still go." The stranger turned, looked to where she had pointed. A narrow path twisted out of the grove, half overgrown, barely a trail at all. It led toward the bluff. The same one mentioned in the letter. They looked back. The girl was gone, not behind a tree, not hidden, just no longer there, like dust brushed from cloth. The stranger stood alone now, in the hush of the grove, where no footsteps echoed and no leaves rustled above. They placed one hand on the nearest tree trunk. It was smooth, warm, felt alive in a way. Few things did out here. Then they stepped forward, toward the path, toward the tree with the split. Trunk toward, whatever the letter hadn't said. And as they walked, the air behind them shifted, not colder, not darker, just emptier, as if something had been waiting to be remembered, and now that it had been, it didn't need to wait anymore. The path narrowed as the stranger moved forward, hemmed in by thorn brush and the dry skeletons of once green things. Twilight settled low across the land, spreading violet blue into the dust, folding daylight away like a letter no longer meant to be read. Their feet, still wrapped in worn cloth, pressed soft against the loose shale of the descent. Each step slipped, slightly. Each breath grew quieter below the bluff, where the world dipped into a hollow once carved by water. The creek bed waited. It hadn't seen rain in years, maybe decades. Whatever stream had once whispered through it had long since dried to silence, leaving only the memory of flow, the shape of movement without its sound. The stranger stepped over the edge, down into the dry, cracked basin, a channel of dust and stone. The air felt different here, heavier still, as if the wind had agreed not to follow, as if sound had struck a bargain with the land and promised not to disturb it. The creek bed stretched out, like a forgotten scar, wide at the center, narrowing at the edges, lined with twisted brush and broken fence wire that once tried to keep cattle from wandering too far. But cattle always wandered, and many had never returned. The bones proved it. Scattered white shapes dotted the basin floor, ribs,
Mostly.
long pale arches that curved from the earth like the hands of something trying to rise. A jawbone here, shattered horn there. Vertebrae stacked like beads strung loosely along dust. The stranger walked between them, careful, slow. The bones were dry, yes, but not clean. The kind of dryness that clung to the idea of heat, that whispered of thirst not just endured, but lost. They crouched near one of the piles, not recent, not sharp with death. These bones had rested here. For seasons, they had faded in the sun, fallen into themselves. The stranger brushed dirt from the edge of one rib. It crumbled slightly. Not from rot, there was no rot in a place this dry. But from time and silence, they stood again, looked up the banks, looked toward the trail that curved off from the north, the one no one followed anymore. There was a post near the bend, leaning half buried in weeds. Something had been nailed to it once, long ago. A sign, maybe. A warning. Now, it held only rust. The stranger moved on, through the wide center of the creek bed, past a rusted bit of cattle gate, mangled and twisted into the earth, past a boot. Still upright, still laced, no foot inside, but close enough to remember one. There were no birds, no insects, only the dry creak of the stranger's steps and the breath between them. Then a sound, faint, not a voice, not wind, but something. The stranger turned nothing, only bones. Only dusk, only silence so loud it almost had a shape. They reached the far edge of the creek and paused there. Just beyond a pile of rock and split wood stood the tree, not large, not grand, but unmistakable. Its trunk split wide at the base, like a mouth opening to speak. Its bark was thick, cracked deep down the center. Branches leaned tired to one side, as if holding something heavy and unseen. The tree from the letter. They approached, dropped to one knee. Fingers pressed into the dirt dry, but not too hard. Digging was slow. The earth gave way in layers. Reluctant, but not resistant, and then the edge of something. Metal, not large. A key, bronzed, simple, worn smooth on one side. The stranger held it in there. Palm, turned it once. It glinted dull in the twilight. Heavy. Though small, the kind of key that didn't open doors. Not the kind with hinges, but something else. Something deeper. They didn't pocket it. Not yet. They just sat there for a moment. Among the cattle, bones in the bed of a creek that hadn't known water in two. Long to matter in the middle of the hush that comes after something has been remembered. The tree above them didn't move, didn't offer comfort, but its shadow stretched long over the stranger's shoulders. And that was something. The bones didn't speak, but their silence did it. Said, "You are not the first," and it asked, "Will you be the last?" The stranger stood, closed their hand around the key, turned back toward the town and the dust. Followed soft and slow, as if the ground itself remembered, and was waiting to be walked again. The walk back from the bluff was quieter than the journey out. The key felt heavier now, not from weight, but from knowing. Its edge pressed into the stranger's palm through the fabric of their coat, small and silent, like a question waiting to be answered. The sky was darkening, the blue gone deep and bruised with only the faintest line of fire lingering on the western rim. The stars hadn't come yet. The wind had gone soft again, the kind of hush that held its breath, not for fear, but for reverence. They didn't return to the main road. Instead, the stranger followed the split trail behind the church ruins. The one that curved around the dried well and past the fence of iron nails hammered into the earth like stakes. That path ended near the back of the schoolhouse or what? Remained of it, the schoolhouse stood tilted, tired, held up more by habit than structure. Its roof sagged, boards warped and sun-bleached, windows hollow with nothing behind them. Ivy had once climbed the side, but it had long since turned to brittle vines, curling like fingers trying to hold on. Behind it, yard was overgrown, a patch of wild grass in silence. No one played here anymore, no one had in years, but something remained. The stranger stepped through the broken slats of the rear fence, the gap wide enough for memory to pass. The wood here was soft and dry, etched with marks too shallow to read from a distance. They moved closer. Names, initials, mostly. Some full, some forgotten mid-knife, a single L, a bent R, the loop of a J left unfinished. Each one carved low in the wood, where small hands once reached with blades borrowed and not returned. The stranger ran their fingers along one. The wood had aged around it. Grain raised, but the letters still held. They moved further down the line, past. A bench, still standing. Barely one leg was broken, and it leaned backward, as if trying to remember what sitting felt like. A ribbon still fluttered from the far corner, knotted to a nail. Pale green. Faded now, but tied with care. The door at the back of the schoolhouse hung crooked. One hinge held, the other groaned when the stranger pushed. Inside, the room was hollow desks, overturned, chalk dust on the floor, undisturbed. A slate cracked in half beneath the window. The air smelled of old paper ash and dried ink, but on the wall, drawings were still there, faint, fading. Little hands had pressed charcoal into. Plaster. A horse, a sun, a stick figure with a round head and arms too long, a name scrawled just below it, not in a child's hand, not one they remembered, but one they'd seen before. In the letter, the stranger stepped forward, ran a thumb across the wall. Dust. Rose, but the name remained. Something about it ached, not sharp, not loud. Just that deep kind of ache that sits behind the heart and hums like a lullaby you forgot how to sing. They sat for a while on the floor. Back against the wall, the room. Growing dim around them, the key rested in their hand now. Not hidden, not held tight. Just there a child's desk lay nearby, its top still scratched with a dozen marks. A tally of days. Or punishments or wishes. The stranger didn't count them. Didn't need to. The room was thick with memory. But not grief. Not exactly. More like a hush. Waiting as if the schoolhouse hadn't been. Abandoned. Only paused. They looked up toward the ceiling. The boards above were warped, but whole. A single beam had a bird's nest tucked in the crook, empty now. Feathers still lay inside. The stranger stood moved back to the doorway, but paused once more at the frame. Someone had carved into the wood there, to deeper than the rest. A message. We stayed as long as we could. No date, no signature. Just that, they stepped back into the yard. The wind moved now, barely enough, to rustle the grass, enough to stir the ribbon. Tied to the fence, the stranger didn't look back. They didn't need to. The names behind the schoolhouse would hold longer than the ones in stone, longer than the ones remembered in voices. Some things didn't need to be read to be known. They just needed to be left where they were, and someone, someday, would find them. Just like this. Just like now. Just like always. The doctor's house sat at the edge of the quiet, tucked behind a row of brittle trees that no longer cast real shade. From a distance, it looked like the others, small. Crooked at the corners, the kind of building that leaned inward on itself like it had grown weary of standing upright. But there was something different in the way the door stayed open just enough to see a hallway inside, not welcoming, not closed. The stranger approached without hurry. The sun had gone down fully now. The world was blue with the hush that came before darkness took hold. The stars were beginning to show, first one, then three, then more. Blinking into life one by one like distant campfires along a far-off ridge, The windows of the house glowed faint. Not from fire, not from lamp, but from memory, the kind of light that lingers when someone leaves a place too slowly. They stepped up onto the porch. The boards flexed beneath their feet, moaned once, then fell quiet again. Inside, the smell was soft. Old cotton. Soap that had long since dried to flakes. A tincture of something sharp and bitter, hidden in the corners of the room. The doctor sat in a chair by the wall. He didn't rise when they entered. Didn't speak. He was thinner than memory allowed, skin drawn tight over his cheekbones, a beard that hadn't been trimmed so much as forgotten. His shirt hung loose at the collar, the sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal arms that had once done 1,000 things, and now did none. On the table beside him, there were no instruments, no scalpel, no cloth, no thread, just a basin of water. That had gone still, and a small stack of yellowed linen, folded once. Left untouched, the stranger stood in the doorway, waited. The doctor's eyes moved up, slow and tired. Not dull, sharp, even now. But not surprised? "You're not bleeding," he said. His voice was hoarse. "It's not from illness, but from disuse." The strangers shook their head once. "No fever." Another shake. "Good." The doctor leaned back slightly. His bones creaked louder than the chair. "I've not got much left to give," he added, eyes drifting to the table. "No laudanum, no gauze, no needles. I ran out of tools 3 winters ago. People still come, though." The stranger stepped inside, closed the door gently behind them. The walls were lined with shelves, but they were mostly bare, few bottles, empty or near it. A jar with a dried root inside, scale that no longer balanced, its pans crooked with. Rust dot on the far wall, a coat hung from a nail, long, black, faded from sun and sweat and something else. The kind of coat worn by someone who carried grief in their pockets and didn't bother shaking it out. "I used to do more," the doctor murmured. "Once set a man's leg with nothing but a splint carved from fence post and whiskey soaked into a torn bedsheet. He walked again. Limped, but walked." The stranger listened. Didn't sit, didn't speak. The room didn't ask for words. Only presence. "You got something wrong I can't see?" the doctor asked, after a pause. The stranger hesitated, then reached into their coat pocket, pulled out. The key dot held it in both hands. The doctor watched it, his brows lowered slightly, not in confusion, in recognition. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Thought that was lost. The stranger didn't ask how he knew, didn't ask what it opened. Sometimes knowing was too heavy. The doctor looked away, toward the empty table, toward the basin that hadn't been touched in days. "There's a room in the back, still locked, been locked for a long time." The stranger looked toward the hallway, a narrow stretch of wall and shadow, no light there, just the memory of footsteps long faded. "Keys don't just open things," the doctor added. "They also end things." The stranger nodded. The doctor's gaze softened. "You look tired?" "I am," he sighed. "So am I." They stood in the quiet together for a while. The house seemed to breathe around them, wood settling, the soft groan of age in the walls. Then the doctor reached for the basin, lifted it gently, carried it to the back, disappearing down the hallway without another word. The stranger followed. Steps slow, each one echoing just slightly in the boards. There was a door at the end, painted white once, now the color of dust. The handle was brass, tarnished cold. The stranger lifted the key. It turned with a soft click. The door opened. They didn't enter. Not yet, but the air that moved from the other side was warmer than expected and smelled faintly of lavender. The doctor said nothing more, and neither did they, because some doors weren't meant to be opened loudly. Some stories ended not with words, but with stillness, and a key finally used. The door stayed open behind them, just enough for light to slip through the crack, just enough for breath to pass between rooms. But they didn't look back. Not toward the hallway, not toward the doctor's chair. toward the key, still warm in their hand, though the lock had long since turned. Outside, the sky had shifted. Clouds now, low, thick, slow-moving, as if the whole sky had sagged under the weight of something it couldn't say out loud. There was no wind, no sudden cold, but the air had changed. It held tight to the skin now, like fabric soaked in the wrong kind of silence. The stranger stepped off the porch, onto earth that felt softer than before, like it had been waiting for something to fall. Thunder rolled across the horizon, not sharp, not fast, just a long, low sound that moved slow as a wagon wheel in deep mud. It didn't crack or split the sky. It just hummed there, behind the clouds, like a voice too old to rise any higher, but no rain came. Not a drop. The stranger walked toward the edge of town, toward the open space beyond the last lamplight. Shadows stretched longer here. Not from sun, not from flame, but from something else. Maybe from the weight of the clouds themselves. Maybe from the stories that had never been finished. Bootsteps barely made sound on the dirt now, and the dust felt hushed. In the distance, a barn door clattered once in the windless dark. Then stillness again. The thunder came once more. Deeper this time, it rumbled through the ribcage, moved underfoot, but the sky stayed dry. Above, lightning flickered without shape. Not forks, not bursts, just the faintest glow, like heat shifting. Behind glass, the stranger kept walking. Toward nothing. Or maybe toward something that hadn't decided yet if it wanted to be found. They passed the old water tower. Its legs rusted through, one side leaning. A crow perched on the rail, its feathers ruffled but unmoved by the dark. It watched the stranger. Pass, didn't call, didn't blink. The stranger looked up at the sky. It was too low now, too. Like something had stretched it too thin, and now it sagged over the town like a wet sheet waiting to collapse. Another roll of thunder, closer. It's time. But the ground stayed dry. Not even the scent of rain, just the smell of dust that had been stirred and not settled. Ahead, a tree bent sideways over. The road, its limbs bare. Twigs like fingers grasping at the air. Beneath it, a small pile of stones, not stacked. Just gathered, the kind of stones people leave when they don't know what else to say. The stranger paused, knelt beside them, ran their hand over the top one. It was warm. Not from sun, from something older. They stood again, watched the horizon. Thunder again. But no flash. No rain. Only that sound, steady, deep, never ending like a drum played beneath the earth by hands long forgotten, the kind of sound. That wasn't warning, wasn't threat, just presence. A reminder that not all storms come to break. Some just come to remind the land it hasn't been forgiven. The stranger turned back, the town's outline barely visible now, soft lanterns, crooked roofs, fences that once stood straight. And above it all, that ceiling of gray, breathing low and slow. They stepped beneath the bent tree, sat in the dirt. Legs crossed, back, straight. Waiting not for rain, not for lightning, but for something in the thunder to say what it needed to say. And maybe it never would. But still, they listened as the clouds moved and the sky refused to cry. The jailhouse didn't look like much. Just one room squared off with stone, older than the town around it, and a roof patched with tin and prayer. The windows were narrow, long vertical slits cut into the walls like scars, and the door stuck on its frame when pushed too hard. A lantern flickered inside. Not bright. It's just enough to cast shadows that leaned the wrong way. The stranger stepped in slow. No lock on the door.
Ow.
There hadn't been in years. Inside, it smelled like sweat, oil, and something quieter like canvas. Left in the sun too long, or a book that no one finished reading. The bars were still there, thick iron welded into the stone. But the hinges had rusted, and the keys were gone. One cot. Bare. Springs exposed. Corner torn open. One stool, uneven. And in the back rolled tight against the far wall. The derolled. It wasn't clean, but it was there. The stranger moved toward it. Coat brushing against the frame of the cell door, not locked, not open, just ajar. Like the room itself hadn't made up its mind, they sat first, let their weight sink slow into the canvas. The bedroll smelled of tobacco and dust, and something else. Tears, maybe just time. They eased back onto the floor, shoulder to stone, spine against chill. The revolver stayed tucked at their side, still wrapped, still unused. The key lay flat in their coat pocket, heavy but still. Above them, the ceiling bore cracks, long, narrow ones that zigzagged through the plaster like maps to nowhere. The stranger watched them in the flicker light. Let their eyes trace the lines over and over, like a child listening to a story they'd already heard 100 times. Outside, the thunder had quieted. No rain followed, just the low groan of the world settling in for night. The jailhouse didn't. Speak it had done enough of that. It had held sobbing men, it had held angry boys, it had held quiet, women with blood on their hands, and no story to give. And now it held silence. The best kind. The stranger closed their eyes, the stone beneath. Then was cold, but not cruel. Just honest. A floor like this doesn't lie. It tells you exactly what it is. Hard. And unforgiving. And always there. The wind pushed once at the window slits, then stopped. The stranger's breath slowed. Each inhale deeper now. Each exhale heavier. The aches in their shoulders softened. The knot behind their eyes eased. And for the first time that day, maybe the first and longer than they could name, the body stopped bracing. Stopped guarding. Stopped remembering. Just. For a while, there was nothing to chase now. No names to recall. No debts to carry. Only the stone. Only the warmth. Their body made against it. Only the dark. And in that quiet. The stranger finally drifted, not fully into sleep, but close enough to forget. What else they were. Just breath. Just heartbeat. Just a body. Curled on the jailhouse floor. It was darker now than the town had felt in years. Not night dark. Not storm dark. Just that thick, breathing kind of dark that settles into the corners of things when everything else has gone quiet. The wind had stopped again. No. Not because it had nothing left to say, but because it was done waiting to be heard. The stranger left the jailhouse without a sound. The floor had cooled their back, but not their bones. Sleep had touched them lightly, like a hand resting on a shoulder before letting go, but it hadn't stayed. Not fully. Out here, it rarely did. The stable sat near the eastern fence, a little removed from the last house, tucked against a sloped patch of land where the grass had tried and failed to grow. The building leaned gently inward, as if listening to itself breathe. Its walls were patched with tin, wood, cloth, whatever had been on hand when repairs were needed. Inside, the lanterns burned low. It's just two, one hanging near the door, the other barely flickering above the tack bench. The stranger paused in the doorway, let their eyes adjust, let their breath settle. The air smelled of horses, and old sweat. Not fresh, not sweet, just honest. The kind of scent that couldn't be washed out even if you wanted it gone. The horses were still. 5 stalls. 3 full. A black gelding blinked slowly in the first, his breath rising soft and even. The second twitched one ear at the sound of footsteps, then went still again. The third stall was empty, but not forgotten. A saddle hung neatly across the gate. A blanket folded tight beneath it, like someone still meant to return. The stranger walked slowly. Their boots, or what remained of them, made soft scuffing. Sounds against the packed dirt floor.
Ow.
The dust here didn't rise. It stayed low, settled, tired of being stirred. They reached the last stall, and there she was, a chestnut filly, small, thin. Her ribs showed through the coat in gentle arcs, not from hunger, but from where? A horse made for distance, not speed. She lifted her head at the sound of the stranger's approach, nostrils flaring just once. No snort. No step back. She knew them, or remembered something like them. The stranger didn't speak. They didn't need to. Instead, they rested a hand against the stall door. Let the fingers curl around splintered wood. Let their thumbs stroke the grain. The warmth of the animal on the other side crept slowly into their chest. Stillness again. The kind that lives only among animals, things that don't pretend. The lantern above the tack bench hissed once, then lowered itself into a long blink. Its flame narrowed, trembled, drew back like it knew. Its time was up. The stranger turned to it, crossed the stable, lifted it down with both. Hands no rush, no fear of dark. They placed it gently on the floor. Watched. The flame flicker once more tall, then thin, then gone. Darkness spread in soft waves. The stable held it. The horses did too. No panic, no sound, just the natural end. The only remaining glow came from the door, faint moonlight stretching. Thin, across the dirt, barely enough to see by, but more than enough to stay. The stranger returned to the stall, leant forward, rested their head unfolded. Arms against the wood, not to sleep, just to stop. The filly pressed her nose toward them, nudged once, then stood still again. Behind them, lantern by the door crackled softly. Its flame wavered. Once, then stilled. The stable went completely dark. But it didn't feel empty. It felt like breath held, like warmth folded. Into silence, the stranger didn't move, didn't speak, didn't dream only. Stayed with the horses with the dark, with the last light gone, and nothing left to see. Only feel only. Midnight in the west, doesn't arrive like it does in other places. It doesn't strike. It seeps, slow, patient, steady. It folds into the corners of the town, under doors, behind shutters, through cracked roofs and paper-thin walls, until everything is wrapped in it. A darkness not just of light, but of memory, of pause, of unspoken things settling into the air. The stranger moved again, not fast, not from sleep, but from the ache of stillness. Their body rose from the stall door 1 inch at a time, back stiff, joints whispering in protest. They stepped into the dark, past where the filly had closed her eyes again, out into the night. The sky was cloudless now. The stars returned in, full, scattered like seeds across black velvet. Moonlight hung low and white. It painted the rooftops in pale silver, touched the fences with a cold glow, and turned the dust beneath their feet to ash-colored silence. The town didn't move. Not anymore. All that was left now was breath, and somewhere, the sound of dripping. Soft, slow, rhythmic drop, water. Maybe, but it hadn't rained. Not in days. The stranger followed it, not with urgency, with curiosity. That quiet kind. The kind that pulls you by the ribs. The sound led them toward the center of town, where the buildings grew closer, narrower, their shadows overlapping like forgotten thoughts. The mercantile was boarded tight, the saloon shuttered. Miss Addie's. Parlor windows glowed faint behind lace, and there it was again. Drip, then nothing. Then nothing. Then, dripped it echoed against the wood of the alleyway. The stranger stepped into it, between the general store and what used to be the old bank. The walls here leaned in, as if whispering to one another, as if trying to keep secrets from the open sky. Drip they stopped, looked up, a hole in the eave above. Not wide, but enough. Moonlight glinted off something wet, an old tin bucket left on. A ledge, bent, rusted through. A shallow pool had gathered in its bottom, not from rain, not from pipe, just from somewhere the water had begun to fall. One drop at a time, through a crack in the metal, onto the wooden crate below, drip, and then silence. The stranger stood beneath it. Let the next drop fall, soft, sudden, onto the back of their hand. It was cold, not icy, but real. Proof that time still moved. Even when everything else refused, They leaned against the alley wall, let their bodies sink into shadow. Let the stillness return, the water continued. Drip, drip. It didn't speed up, didn't slow. It just kept. The town around them was breathless. Somewhere a windmill creaked once, far off then stilled. An owl called, short and low and silent. Again, the stranger's thoughts softened. One, Con. Just quiet. This hour was for those who didn't sleep, who listened instead, who waited, and in that alley. With moonlight glancing off rust and rot, and water falling one heartbeat at a time, they waited too. For what? They weren't sure. Maybe for morning, maybe for nothing, maybe just for the next drip, and the one after. Because when the night bleeds through the roof, when the stars hold their breath and the town forgets itself, sometimes all there is left to doze, lean back against the wall, count the things that still move. One, then another, then silence again. There's an hour in towns like this, and the night isn't over, but something has changed. It's not light. Not yet. The stars are still out, thin and trembling. The moon has dipped behind the ridge, its work done, leaving behind a sky that feels tired of holding weight. But the dark isn't as thick now, not as deep, not as sure of itself. The stranger walked slowly back toward the edge of town, each step soft, as if the world might break beneath them. Boot soles thudded gently on the packed ground, not loud, not even noticeable, just present. There were no lamps. Burning now, no windows left glowing, everything lay in wait. Not for dawn exactly, but for whatever came just before it. That sliver of time when people begin to stir in their sleep without knowing why, when dogs twitch in their dreams, when barns creak without wind, and no one's sure if it's ghosts or just the cold. The stranger passed the chapel ruins. Bell still hung there, swaying slightly from a rope long worn, but it hadn't rung in years and wouldn't now. Not unless something was truly ending or beginning. The air had grown colder, not sharply, but slow, like the sky was remembering what breath felt like. Each inhale lingered longer now, each exhale clouded faintly, the way it does before sunrise when the land still doesn't trust the light to come back. The key in their coat had shifted, pressed now against their chest instead of their side. It didn't hurt, but they noticed it, as if it too had turned, as if it had waited long enough in the silence. They stopped near the edge of the field, the one that had never grown much of anything. The fence posts leaned in pairs, wire gone in most places, just long stretches of space now, lined by wood shaped by wind and time. The sky above them shifted from black to something lighter, not blue, not gray, just the kind of color you couldn't name, the kind you feel before you see. The stranger lowered themselves to the ground, legs folding beneath them, coat pooling at their sides. They rested their back against the fence post. The cold wood met them with no resistance, no sound but breath and earth, and the soft stretch of a world beginning to loosen its grip on sleep. They closed their eyes, not to sleep, but to listen better. And in that not morning hush, they could hear it faint, far off, the creak of leather from a saddle being checked, the low murmur of someone speaking to a horse, the click of a rifle bolt being closed slow, with care, no danger in it, just preparation, not fear, but readiness. The stranger didn't move, just listened. These were the hours, no, not the sheriff, not the preacher, not the banker or the barkeep, or the ones who wore guns on their belts and walked like the land owed them something. This time, this slow, unraveling stillness belonged to those who had waited and still were. When the first bird called, soft and low, the stranger smiled. Not wide, not happy, just soft. Like someone recognizing the shape of a thing they'd been missing. The sky was still more dark then. Light. But not for much longer. Soon the world would return. The boots would scuff. Again the voices would rise. The dust would lift. And this moment would fold itself back into the earth, where it would wait until the next night. The next slow not morning. The stranger stood, brushed the dirt from their coat, turned toward the trail again. The key pressed gently against. Their chest in behind them, the stars blinked out one by one. The sun hadn't quite broken the ridge yet, but its light was beginning to stretch, pale and bone-thin, across the tops of fence posts and rooftops. That early hour where color doesn't return all at once, just bleeds in, slow and unsure, like someone remembering how to speak after a long silence. The stranger followed the edge of town, past the last water trough, where flies clung even in the cool, and where the boards creaked beneath no weight at all. He was sitting where he always had, on the bench beneath the crooked elm, next to the blacksmith's shed, or what was left of it. The tree had long since stopped growing, bark cracked through, and moss climbing up from the roots, but its shadow still knew where to fall. He wore the same hat, the same jacket, both frayed in familiar places. The lines on his face didn't move much anymore, except for the corner of one eye where time had left its weight in his hand. The watch, not in his pocket, not on a chain, just cradled in his palm like something you didn't trust enough to carry too. Far away from Skin, the stranger approached, slow. There was no need to announce. Themselves, he already knew. He lifted the watch just slightly. Not to show it, but to feel it. "I keep it wound," he said, voice soft from sleep or age or the long company of silence, even though it won't tick. The stranger nodded, sat down beside him. Not close, but near enough. The man didn't look over, didn't smile, didn't need to. He just held the watch steady in both hands. The glass face was clean, cracked once. In the corner, the second hand had stopped between two marks, almost at the one, not quite at the two. It had been that way for years, maybe longer. "Folks used to ask what I was waiting for," the man said. A faint breath of a chuckle, like I'd know. The wind moved once through the broken leaves above them. Didn't stay long, just enough to rattle something small in the blacksmith's shed. A nail, maybe? Hook? A memory? "You remember her?" he asked, still not looking over his. The voice didn't tremble, but it softened. The stranger did, not by answer, but by stillness. He nodded, slow. Once the man sighed. "She gave it to me the day the train left," he said. "Said it would remind me to come back. Said if I kept it wound, it would mean I hadn't forgotten." He turned the watch in his hand. The metal caught the sun, just barely, but it stopped before the next morning. Neither of them spoke, not for a while. The light crept closer to the ground. A beetle moved through the dust at their feet.
What?
A horse far off nickered once. Tired and distant, the man set the watch down on the bench between them, carefully, as though it might still matter. "I don't need it to start again," he said. "That's not the point anymore." He folded his hands in his lap. "I just want to remember the sound it made when it did tick. Just once, just for a second." The stranger looked at the watch, at the unmoving hands, at the tiny second line, paused mid-step. The man shifted slightly, rested his back against the wall, closed his eyes, and didn't speak again. The light touched the edge of the bench, then the corner of the watch. It glinted gently. Didn't move, didn't need to. The stranger stood, left the watch where it was. The man didn't open his eyes. He just leaned back into the morning and waited for nothing in particular, just for the sun to finish rising, for the air to remember. Warmth, for something to move even if it wasn't time. And behind them, the second hand stayed where it always had, not forward, not back, just paused on the edge of before.